over here. Welcome. My name is Elizabeth Rose. I'm the director of the Jewish Historical Society, and I'm very excited to welcome you to this program this evening. The idea of this program was to hear from people who are part of our community now, and some of whom have been part of the community for a long time, about how LGBTQ Jews in the Hartford area have made a place for themselves over the past several decades, and what has changed, what hasn't changed, what challenges people have faced while seeking full inclusion in the Jewish community. And this is, part of our mission of the Jewish Historical Society is to document and to share the stories of Jewish Hartford. And we think this is a very important story to document and to share. And it's certainly one of the changes in our society that, that I've lived through personally in my life and seen follow the changes in, I think is very important for us to consider. So very briefly, I learned that the first gay and lesbian synagogue in the country was formed in 1972, which makes it 50 years from that landmark. And that was in Los Angeles, followed by synagogues in other parts of the country, of course. And we're going to hear about Segula, which is the congregation that was formed here in Hartford in the mid-1980s. And it was around a time when gays and lesbians and others felt unwelcome in many synagogues. And also at the same time in the 80s, when the AIDS crisis was having such a big impact that people were feeling especially in need of spiritual homes. So so you should have, I'm not going to do introductions for each of our panelists. We did have this nice handout, which I hope you received, that have all their information, and some of them are nice enough to provide contact information if you want to follow up with them later. So with that, I'm just going to turn it over to our first panelist, who is Karen Dickman. So.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Dickman, and even though this is my own history, I have to make notes for myself because I need them. And before I even start talking, when I talk about my own Segula experience, I'm going to be talking about it with just the letters G and L, because in those days we didn't include BT and Q and anything else. So I'm just going to be referring to G and L, gay and lesbian history. So talking about my own Segula experience, Frank Gaines was my best friend in high school, who died from AIDS in 1989 at the age of 36. He wasn't Jewish, but I wanted to save Warner's Cottage for him. And there was no way I was going into a mainstream synagogue for this. So where do I find a gay and lesbian synagogue in the Hartford area? These were the days that were pre-Google. So I searched using the Metroline newspaper, which was our community newspaper. And lo and behold, I found Segula, a listing for them, and it was a local Havurah that meets once a month, that met once a month in a little dark room of the Metroline store on Farmington Avenue, which is still there. Well, the store is. So the next Friday night service was coming up, and off I went. And yikes, I walked in and there were like these 9 guys who looked like the boys I went to Hebrew school with, and I almost freaked out. Of course, I think they did too. They looked at me, they were very puzzled, but they were relieved because they only had 9 and I was the 10th one. They could have a million, even though I was a lesbian. So it felt very strange to me. And yet it was also very familiar, because they conducted a very traditional service, and I was raised conservative. I was intrigued by the whole thing, but I was kind of ambivalent. After all, I really only went to say Kaddish for my friend Frank. But after the service, they came up to me. I was kind of an oddity, they introduced themselves to me and they wondered, how I found them, why I was there. And they wanted to know if I had any intentions of coming regularly. So I learned that Amsagula was established in 1985, which was only about 4 years prior. And they wanted to grow. So we told them, you guys want to grow, you got to include the lesbians. So they eventually did. Alan Cohen. Okay. Eventually, Alan Cohen, may he rest in peace, stepped up to the role of president and formed a new board that included women. They met regularly. They reached out to the greater gay and lesbian community in Hartford, actually all over the state, and they urged them to attend services. The board members also attended services and made a point of talking to everyone after at the ONIG to make them feel welcome. And our members grew. We had more and more people coming, and eventually outgrew that little dark room above the Metroline store. And we moved over to the West Hartford UConn campus, which was. We met for services there on Friday nights and once a month. And even though it was a public building, we felt safe congregating there because who's there on a Friday night? And in those days, we had to keep our membership and our location private because we still feared for our jobs. So that was a great place for us. Again, this was in the early 1990s when this was going on. During those years, Amsagula, as I said, grew and flourished with members from all over the state. And at one point, we had about 50 members. And most everyone attended our lively Passover Seders and crazy Hanukkah parties. And around that time, we also inherited a rabbi. Rabbi Fana Timoner became our official non-paid volunteer rabbi. I don't recall how she came to us, but once a month, she schlepped up to West Hartford from Woodbridge with her husband and children and led services for us. She also offered spiritual guidance to us and helped us merge our lifestyle with our faith. And one of the many things she taught us was the translation for Amsagula. I never knew. It means a unique nation. And every time we chanted Lefado D, we loudly and proudly repeated Amsagula. And to this day, I think of the Havurah every time I chant the prayer. We would never know how Rabbi Fana found Amsagula or what motivated her to volunteer to be our spiritual leader. But we had a lot of fun speculating. Is she really a closeted lesbian? We never knew. But she did tell us that she could not get a paying job on a pulpit because of her affiliation with us. Mm-hmm. It didn't stop her from coming. She came anyway. Then after, a few years, as it often happens, some members became dissatisfied with our volunteer rabbi. They weren't happy over this or that. I don't remember the particulars. Other members were very happy, and so there were many heated arguments over her tenure with Amsagula. I never understood this. After all, it's not like there was a long line of volunteer rabbis waiting to take her place. But my argument fell on deaf ears. Okay, so as these discussions went on behind the scenes, Rabbi Fana made the decision for us, and eventually she needed to become gainfully employed, so she enlisted in the Army and became a chaplain. Without a facilitator or a rabbi to help us through these battles, Amsagula's membership began to dwindle and formally dissolved in 1995. And even though it was time for this to happen, I was really sad over its demise and withdrew from any synagogue membership anywhere. A few years later, I thought, well, okay, maybe I should try to resurrect Amsagula in some fashion. One idea I had was to form a small group under the guise of a mainstream synagogue, but that wasn't feasible. After talking to a couple of rabbis, I said, okay, give that one up. Besides, no one had the energy or interest after all those divisive battles. Nobody cared anymore. So about 10 years later, I regained interest in synagogue membership when I learned about the lesbian rabbi at CBI, Congregation Beth Israel. So Rabbi Alyssa Cohen, I joined. She renewed my faith, and though I still missed her on Mabarah, she helped me heal. And when she moved on, so did I. I tried other synagogues, but none were a fit. So I worked my way back to CBI, where I'm still a member. And under the leadership of Rabbi Andy Flegel, CBI has taken giant steps towards LGBTQ inclusion. The first step was our Pride Shabbat several years ago, and for the first time in over 10 years, my lifestyle and faith again felt united. And I'll always be grateful to Rabbi Andy for that, and for a few other things. So, and yet I still miss that unique oneness I felt with Amsabula. I miss the oneness when I live streamed Congregation Day Torah. That's the LGBTQ synagogue in New York City. However, unless I move to a city large enough to have an LGBTQ synagogue, that's not going to happen. So today's model seems to call more for assimilation into mainstream synagogues. And that's not all bad. In fact, it's pretty good. But I still long for the days when we were a cult.
Thank you very much, Karen. That was beautiful. And we're going to pass it to Mark Slitt, who is also going to talk a little bit about experiences with gay and lesbian synagogues, both here and there.
Thank you, Karen. I'm really happy to learn about the history. I grew up in here in West Hartford. I grew up as a conservative Jew going to Bethel, and was not really out in high school, although I knew I was attracted to anywhere. So I wasn't really thinking about connecting my Judaism and my sexual orientation anyway. At the time that I was living here. And after college, I moved away from here for 30 years. Because I didn't want to for 30 years later, I couldn't speak up.
That's a part.
So I have been very lucky to be associated and affiliated with multiple LGBTQ synagogues in my adulthood. First in Washington, D.C., and then in Chicago, and then ultimately in Dallas, where I lived for 13 years. And in Dallas, I was the president of Bethel Binah for 4 years and was on the board for 10 or 11 years. So I saw LGBTQ, and Sharon is absolutely right. At the beginning, they were GNL, they were gay and lesbian synagogues back in the day, like in the 80s, even the early 2000s, we still had not evolved as a community at that point where we were really inclusive of all the members of our community. So, like most other organizations, we didn't have the LGBT until much later. It's been an evolving situation. So I was involved both as a congregant and as a leader in congregations. And I have to say, I agree. I know you're going to kill you, but I actually agree with you. Karen, I don't know. But I do miss those good old days. As much as I love CBI, and shout out to Rabbi Andy, who has been fabulous and a true champion of our community. And to Rabbi Small, who was here, has also been very, very supportive of our LGBTQ community. I do miss those days because you'd walk into the synagogue, the LGBTQ synagogue, and it was your home. And you knew, you didn't have to guess. You know, when you go into a mainstream synagogue, you have to go, yeah, she works with me. Often you can figure it out, but you're not always right. But, you know, when you were a member of an LGBTQ synagogue, you knew this was your home turf and you ruled the roost and it was your space and it felt very safe and very comforting. And it was a wonderful way to integrate your Judaism and your sexual orientation. Now, some people would say, well, why do you even need that? Why can't you just be a member of the synagogue? Well, for one of the reasons that I just mentioned. But also, you know, I spent 13 years in Dallas. Dallas is a very large Jewish community. Aaron and Yael are here. I knew that in those days. A lot of people who are coming out don't necessarily want to go to Friday night services and run into Aunt Sarah. because they're not up to their families yet. So you live in a city like Dallas or Washington or Chicago or New York or wherever, you may not want to go to your family's synagogue. Even if they're gay welcoming, gay affirming, if you're not at one. So our types of congregations really provided a safe space where you could truly be an LGBT Jew. No questions asked, no apologies, no hiding anything, no pronouns, and that sort of thing. So it was very, very empowering. And I do miss that. But I'm also really thrilled to be part of the synagogue now where it's a guy that is affirming and is welcoming. So when I came back, so in my adulthood, I migrated to being a Reform Jew, and that Elgina, the synagogue I was the leader of in Dallas, affiliated with URJ, although back then was still UHC, Union of American Congregations. And I actually was the lone dissenting vote on the board to not vote to join the affiliate. And the reason why was we always promoted ourselves as an LGBT. We were saying a gay and lesbian congregation, by and for gay and lesbian Jews. We were completely led that we had no, we led services ourselves. But in order to affiliate with it's now the URJ, we had to promote ourselves as a synagogue with an outreach to the LGBTQ community. I said, well, that's not what we are. We're not about outreaching. We are. This is by us and for us. But we knew it was nod, and we knew it. They had to say that to be, egalitarian. And we did not discriminate. You could be straight. We had lots of straight members of our congregation. We had a lot of interfaith couples. We had a lot of, like I said, heterosexual couples as well. And everybody was welcome. But it still rankled me that we had to say that we were the synagogue with the outreach to the community when we really were the community and we really couldn't call ourselves what we were. And that was the reason why I voted against affiliation. However, I was very happy that we did affiliate. That's how we got our first Torah. That's how we got connected with LGBT clergy over the years. And it was a very enriching affiliation. To part of the movement and to be seen as part of mainstream Judaism. We were also a member of the Union, the World Congress of Gay and Lesbian Jewish Organizations. Yes, there is such a thing. There is a broad global organization for our types of congregations all over the world: North America, South America, Europe, Israel. We are everywhere. And that's how I first found out about Amsterdam. I was looking through, a listing of all the member organizations of the World Congress of Gay and Lesbian Jewish Organizations. They're like, holy CRAP. There's a gay and lesbian synagogue in my hometown of West Hartford, Connecticut. That shocked me because I never thought that was possible in all these years. Okay, sure. And so, I wasn't living here to take advantage of it, but I was really thrilled that it existed. I'm really surprised that it existed. I'm really sorry that it went out of existence. And I think I'll just leave it there because I have such passion for the topic of LGBTQ synagogues. I could talk for days on the topic. I could talk for days about my experience in Dallas and what it was like to lead the organization. But I'm going to leave it there because I know other people have important things they want to share as well. I'd be happy to answer questions afterwards.
Thank you very much, Mark. If you want to just pass it down to Karen at the other end of the table, we're going to shift for a little bit to talk about people's experiences with raising children as being in the gay and lesbian community. Why don't you go first and then we'll pass it to Marcia. If you can hold the mic pretty close to you, that will help.
Okay.
Yes, thank you.
It's too close. And my voice is a little raspy, so that's me. Don't worry about it. Yeah, so Mark and I met in Dallas. Yes. Yael and I decided to be really brave, although as close as we could get to claiming who we were at that time was by calling it the L word. We could not actually pronounce the word lesbian in those days. Took a long time to come out, and part of it had to do with Texas. Yes, it's in the middle of the Bible Belt, and they're not very liberal. That probably doesn't surprise anybody, right? We had, well, yes, I have two biological children. When Yael and I got together, they were roughly around 10. And slowly we came out to them. We were trying to learn how to accept ourselves at that time as well. And I think one of the strangest things, looking back on it, that we did to them was we gave them permission to tell one person that if they wanted to talk about the fact that Yael and I were the L word, really, that they could choose one person to talk to, or they could talk to us, or maybe my sister was the only other person. So Amy took that seriously and talked to one person. And when you read Debbie's memoir, which hopefully will be published within the next year, you'll find out that what Debbie interpreted that to mean was one person a day. Sort of how it worked. It was very tough. I was relatively newly divorced. Texas was not very positive about us. And I was terrified that my husband would sue for custody and get the children. And I did not want that to happen. So we lived a rather positive life. I did work for a Reformed synagogue, and the inner circle knew that we were lesbians, but it wasn't public because I was afraid I'd lose my job. I was afraid I'd lose my kids. You know, it was a hard time. There was a group for kids. I can't remember the name of it at the moment, but both of my kids know it. As I said, they were about 10 when we started talking to them. So they were early teens when we found this group where they could talk to other kids of gay or lesbian parents. And yes, still only gays or lesbians then. I'm old. I was in New York City the summer of Stonewall. It would never have occurred to me to be out there fighting for my rights. I could barely even acknowledge that that was who I was. So moving forward, very hard to come out and to give our kids a normal experience. They survived it. They were a combination of very open and honest with the other teens in their group. It was called Trust. Teens, something, reaching out to other teens. Yeah. They thought it was pretty hokey, but they did it because we sort of forced them to.
Yes, we did.
We met a lot of really good parents, and that was very helpful for us. Fortunately, I will tell, well, at this point, a long time has passed, and we're all very much more advanced in terms of accepting ourselves and everything else. And I will say that when our now 11-year-old 6th grade granddaughter was in 4th grade, she and her friends in the spring of that year put together a PowerPoint presentation of all of the possible terminology and abbreviations and everything like that. And so for me to look at this bio of us and not see the plus makes me think that our granddaughter would not be happy with this paper. You know, there are many other people to be included in our community right now. And I've learned a lot of vocabulary that I sort of understand. Yeah, that's, by the way, one other quick thing before I pass the mic to Marge. If you look on the back of this bio page, you will notice that my email says @mail.com. The G somehow.
I wasn't sure about that. I was like, maybe she has some other email service I have not heard of, but yeah.
It's just Gmail.
Thank you.
So that was my experience in Texas. We were not brave enough to be out in any kind of full way. We really wanted our kids to be not out about us. It was very complicated and challenging. And I really can't wait to hear what you two have to say about raising Emma.
So, oh, Karen, that was so good. Well, everybody's been so good. So I'm Ray and this is Marge. The three of us moved to Connecticut over 30 years ago. And our life was very, very different. In New York City, we lived in a duplex and we had 2 bedrooms and we, 1 bathroom, and we moved into Connecticut. We have 4 bedrooms and 4 bathrooms. And I said to my good friends, how do you keep track of the toilet paper? Well, our lives in New York were very different. First of all, Emma was a planned child. We went through artificial insemination and we talked for 9 years about Emma. And yeah, but there's a good picture up there, the 3 of us. So you'll see a few more pictures. And so we spoke to every friend. We went to every women's concert where everybody was adopting children from South America in every far off place. And I said, Margie, those children need homes. Can't we parent them and adopt them? She said, no, I want to have the experience of carrying a child. And I certainly finally found the partner in my life, and I didn't want to give her up to the child. I wanted equal rights with the child. You could tell how insecure I was. But in New York, we were part of a wonderful Jewish community. By that I mean it was cultural. A holiday never passed when we didn't have an invitation. And we went many years in West Hartford, the 2 of us alone, sitting in our kitchen celebrating with a little meal from the friend. So we now have friends because Paula is here and she, we know Paula 45 years, so we can have parties together for the holidays. But we were part of a Jewish community and a gay community. We knew a lot of gay men and we really enjoyed the richness of all of those communities together. And because we had such a dynamite apartment, people used to love to come to parties at our house. And then Margie had an opportunity to move to Connecticut. And I had always wanted, I was told that if you passed a certain age and you haven't left New York, you really are never going to leave. And I'm an adventurer. So I said, we have to go and live somewhere else for a while. I thought of California or Oregon or somewhere like that, where they had these great gay communities. But we traveled to West Hartford and we started to, our friends in West Hartford were Emma's friends. So we switched from this gay Jewish community to heterosexual parents. And I think our only guideline was that they shouldn't ask us a lot of questions and they should accept Emma. Well, Emma was at Morley School, and I want to be clear about this. Margie and I went to 2 or 3 schools and we interviewed the principal. We wanted to make sure the principal was comfortable with us being lesbians and with Emma being a student there with an unidentified father. And we chose Morley because our real estate agent told us we have very poor criteria for buying a house. If it's old and falling down, we like it. If it's new and modern, she said, no, this is a bad house. All right. And it was a block away from Morley. Emma goes to school and Emma begins to tell everybody she has 2 mothers. we start to get phone calls about two mothers. Yes,
Can you just tell us what year this was for context?
year,
1992. 92, we moved up here in 92.
Thank you.
so I'm old, I don't remember. the So she starts talking about two things to all the children, having two mothers and spirits. She was able to see a lot of ghosts at the school. So people attached her if they were interested in spiritual discussions or to mothers. And we became very popular. Because you had to be open, or you'll be as sick as your secret. And I lived in tremendous fear that Emma would be taken away from me. Because I could have adopted her in New York, but I could not adopt her in Connecticut. And it was very painful. We went on vacations and I would think something will happen. It's like a Woody Allen approach to being a parent, and the police will come and they will take Emma away. And I lived until she was 18 this year. And because in New York, we had the support of Center Kids, which is an organization that was formed in the late 80s, early 90s, mid-80s, of people having children. There were a lot of men. There were a lot of men from the gay synagogue. We went there. A lot of people were powerful lawyers. And we all gathered together at least once a month. And we had some occasional play dates with one another so the children would know other children. Emma did not have that when she moved to Connecticut. But Emma is a wonderful ambassador. And when it became time to find a synagogue, this is supposed to be a little bit about our Jewish life. Well, Margie got on the phone and called a number of synagogues. And Emma was the focus, and people told us, you know, you should pick a synagogue that's near where she's going to school rather than one in Glastonbury or one in Enfield. We liked those very much. We also went to Sion. So we show up at Beth Israel and we wanted to interview the rabbi. Now, this gentleman, Sim, was the rabbi at that time, and he played the guitar. And it was just wonderful. We loved him, and he had good politics. So we decided to join them. And the next important thing in our relationship with Israel is that as Emma became more and more affiliated, they found out she could sing and they enjoyed her voice and she got to sing a lot of things. It soon came time for the bat mitzvah. Now, we had lived in a little fear about this. One, if we had a son, and two, how were we going to handle what parents would be saying? We asked the father, why are there two mothers up there? What's going on? So we went and met with Rabbi Fuchs. We had met with him when he came, because we were ready to leave because there was a change in the rabbi. We felt betrayed somehow that we had gone to all this trouble to find this other rabbi and this other facility, and we were happy with that. And he was a really nice, warm person, and he handled the death of my brother well. I mean, he was very respectful. So we show up at Rabbi Fuchs and we say, you know, we want to talk to you, everybody's interviewed you, but we wanted you to know how you feel about the lesbian and gay community. He said, well, you should know, I'm a big pro civil rights guy. And he tells us his whole history in supporting civil rights. And so he became attached in some way to making Emma's experience there successful. So I must admit, I was telling Karen, I didn't understand the politics of Jewish communal life. I only understood maybe the politics in New York, running for mayor, but I was very naive about Jewish life in the synagogue. And Emma did have her own bat mitzvah, and it was a solo bat mitzvah because we did not want her exposed. And it was very successful. The synagogue had chosen, and Margie was involved in the dialogue about this, a piece. And that piece happens to also be chanted on Yom Kippur. So she not only was very visible for her bat mitzvah, but she was visible every Yom Kippur going forward until she moved out to Berlin. And people, it wasn't that they were so interested in Marge and I, Emma was the ambassador. How's Emma doing in school? Where is she gonna go to college? What's happening? Is she gonna sing professionally? Her voice is so beautiful. And this went on, and we would go, and I would be lonely. I was lonely at the synagogue. I was lonely because there was no mention of us. How's it going being two lesbians, the only ones here in the synagogue? And the only person who really always invited us to dinner was Pamela Siskin. Pamela Siskin invited us to meet other people, invited us to dinner, and we can't say enough. And she helped me heal in many ways because I have a professional directing background, and she allowed me to direct plays. But you see, at a synagogue, the plays are usual musicals. And I was putting on plays about the Holocaust, about old Jewish tales. It didn't really fit very well, but they were appreciated. Okay, but that was my contribution to that. Margie was involved in delivering packages, assembling packages, anything Pamela asked, we would do. And as Emma left and is past, well past college, she did a show in New York called Laughing All the Way to the Sperm Bank. And honestly, our neighbors, those people who were supporting us, who were so kind to Emma, took the trip to New York. We had to meet them, make sure they were safe, find a place to feed them, but they all came. I don't remember one person coming to New York. I do remember that people from my own spiritual group separately came. So it was a two-edged sword there at the synagogue. But I can tell you that we showed up for everything that Pamela or the rabbi asked us to do. And
What about,
what?
how about when Alyssa?
Oh, that's a good point. I have to do that for you. So the outlet means you're out because their daughter sang. Alyssa came to interview for her job. And Pamela said, would you meet Alyssa and Missy? We were not on the search committee. No one ever thought to put us on any search. But we met them at the very good Japanese restaurant that's no longer in existence. And we had a very nice evening with them. And we reported back that they were two nice women and we're sure that they would make a good contribution. Well, the board was ambivalent. And I think that's how it works. And I got a phone call from Pamela. We need you to come to a board meeting. And I said, why? She said, well, you were the only ones we met. And we want you to answer some questions. And that's all that Pamela said. And I got there. Now, I'm a therapist in West Hartford. I am now totally gonna do something that is gonna place me out totally as a lesbian. And, you know, I don't mind my clients know, but I wasn't ready to be on the front page of the newspaper. So, at this board meeting, they wanted to know about marriage, why they weren't married, what was the difference between being married and a commitment ceremony. They wanted to know a lot of different things. How do I think the community would respond to a lesbian rabbi and her partner? And it went on for a long time. And I must tell you, my legs were shaking, and I do a lot of public speaking. I used to, and I was nervous because I had to really be honest and pave the way for them to come to the synagogue. And it was painful. It was really painful. I felt stripped down. And a number of synagogue board members called me that night and apologized. They weren't clear whether they were apologizing because they didn't know we were lesbians. They must have had their eyes closed. Or they didn't, you know, understand what was going to happen at the board meeting. And I'm sorry, it was so invasive. So, they came to West Hartford, they were accepted. We were not personal friends with them. I don't know whether Alyssa ever knew this story and Missy. I thought that the synagogue really struggled with bringing them. And of course, if you know the history, they did lose members. Even though we were so out as lesbians, they did lose members, and they rebuilt, and that was, I think, a major shift at the synagogue. However, a lot of people forget that story and forget Emma, that, you know, Emma is an ambassador. She is so delightful. In this book, this is a book about if these ovaries could talk. So there's a separate interview with Emma, and she talks about what it's like to grow up with kids, laughing, oh, they gay, and all these kinds of things. She talks very openly, very honestly about what it was like to grow up in West Hartford. And there's an interview with Margie and I about our fears and what it was like to parent Emma. And just coincidentally, there's an interview with my niece and her partner. And so we count how many pages we all got. We'd like to take questions. I think that sometimes that Israel has had some missteps about dealing with the death of certain family members. And the only time people they came to my our house, when Sim was the rabbi, and he came and wanted to know if I want some kind of service. And when my second brother died, I had just finished directing a play and giving a lot of my time. They would not allow my brother's service to be at the synagogue. And there was such an embarrassment that the president came to his funeral because they were trying to figure out how that happened, and they wanted me to feel included. But the hurt is still there, you know, you're really part of a community. Yeah. So we're not affiliated now with the synagogue. We watch a lot of them through Zoom because I've worked with certain cantors, and they sing and I watch them on Zoom. And we go to services, some services.
You have a question over here, right?
I'm done.
Thank you very much.
No one took him away.
I'm gonna pass it down to Karen. Traeger again. Thank you. Thank you so much.
So Marge, thanks for the transition. I'm gonna pick it up sort of when Alyssa came here as the assistant rabbi at CBI. But a little background. Yael and I have been together in Dallas for 10 years. And I was out at work. You weren't really out at work in those days. We kept things very quiet. We talked to our family members one by one, thinking that every one of them would stop speaking to us. No one stopped speaking to us except one of my uncles. And he got over himself after a while. But anyway, it never occurred to me at that time that we would ever be able to be married to each other. How could it happen? It just wasn't going to happen. So we were together for just about 10 years, and we moved to West Hartford for my job. And the first year that we were here, we couldn't agree on what congregation to belong to, so we went everywhere. I grew up conservative, but became a Reformed Jew by choice when I was in graduate school. And Yael grew up Orthodox in New Orleans, and she also lived in Israel, became a citizen for 7 years-ish. And so she wanted a more traditional service with lots of Hebrew. And I wanted to be able to understand what we were saying, and my Hebrew's not bad, but and sorry to anyone who loves conservative Judaism, but I can't stand the repetition of new stuff. Anyway, so that's not why I left being conservative Judah. Anyway, we came here. And in the beginning, we ended up belonging to both Beth Israel and Bethel because Yael needed more conservative and I needed more reform. And in Dallas, the synagogue where I worked was Temple Emmanuel in Dallas, which I believe is still one of the 8 largest congregations in the country. And I loved that high church. I just loved it. And so when I saw the sanctuary at Beth Israel, yes, I needed to be in that sanctuary. So we joined the synagogue, and Alyssa came to be the rabbi, and she ended up having some kind of gathering at her home one night so that those of us who were gay and lesbian members of the congregation could come and meet each other. And we showed up with great trepidation because could we really do this? And as a result, we became very good friends with Alyssa and Missy and several other people in that. And then all of a sudden we started talking about having a commitment ceremony. Yael and I had 3 ceremonies. The commitment was our first. That's all you could do in those days. It was the year 2000. Beth Israel had just had a reform movement around that time, came out in support of gay lesbian relationships and membership and rights and all that stuff. And so the board of Beth Israel had finally voted that they were okay with having their rabbis officiate at same-sex commitment ceremonies, because again, that's all there were in those days, but not in the sanctuary. Well, we had friends. So our ceremony was listed. We booked the sanctuary and we booked Feldman Hall. Is that the big one? Haas Hall. We booked Haas Hall. We listed it in the calendar as a birthday party.
I remember that.
Yes. We invited 250 people. I'm telling you, yeah. And I think that was one of the times when Steve, the senior rabbi, decided that he didn't love me so much anymore because we asked Alyssa to officiate at our commitment ceremony. I think he was a little jealous about that. Debbie Friedman was our cantor. And we had our commitment ceremony in the sanctuary on the bema. Debbie Friedman at the keyboard, Alyssa officiating at everything. Yael's mom walked her down the aisle, this Southern Orthodox woman from New Orleans. No, my dad did not walk me down the aisle, but he was present. And I think Amy and Debbie, yes, Amy and Debbie walked me down the aisle at that ceremony. Yeah, and it was amazing. I mean, it was a birthday party. We couldn't tell anyone. But we invited people from all different walks of our lives, straight and gay. Elle has 7 siblings. She's the oldest. I want to say all of them came to this, including the mom, and celebrated with us, brought their kids who were teenagers and older. My family were all present. Friends from where we were before and all kinds of people showed up. It was amazing. It was amazing. And somebody I worked with at Federation, we were looking for a photographer. And so this straight woman said to me, "Oh, you need a photographer? Well, call Karen. She did our daughter's bat mitzvah, and it was wonderful." And so, yes, we met Karen through a heterosexual connection. She was our photographer, our commitment ceremony. And after the ceremony was over, we just all looked at each other and said, "Well, can we be friends now?" So that was really the beginning of our involvement in anything resembling the, at that time, GL community in the West Hartford area. The next ceremony that we had was 5 years later. Yael got downsized from her position and therefore lost her health insurance. And we weren't married yet. I worked at the Jewish Federation for Greater Hartford, and I asked them if there was any way that she could be on my insurance. Sure, have a civil union. So back we traced to Bloomfield Town Hall and registered for that. And that ceremony, oh, by this time, our daughter Debbie was marrying a young man who is not Jewish. He's not anything, but he's not Jewish. And nobody at Beth Israel could marry them. And they said, "We'd be so happy for them to be married elsewhere, and then we'll be so welcoming after they're married." Thanks anyway, guys. So at that point, they went and talked to Jeff Bennett at Temple Sinai in Newington. And he said, "I do interfaith ceremonies, but only if they're members of my congregation." So Debbie and Jeremy joined the congregation, and so did we. And yes, our civil union was held at our home in Bloomfield. Jeff Bennett came and officiated. It was very small. And the reason that we did that was really so that you could have insurance. It never occurred to me in my entire life that the state of Connecticut would ever allow us to be married to each other. And then it happened. And it took us another year after it was legal before we finally decided we could do this. And so our third ceremony, an actual wedding, took place at Temple Sinai. And that one, Jeff Bennett and our daughter Amy, who at that point was either 4th or 5th year medical student, co-officiated. She did all the parts she could do, and he did the parts she couldn't do. And I just can't even tell you how amazing and wonderful that was. And yeah, we had lots of family and good friends, and I don't think we'll do the fourth ceremony. But you can never tell.
You never know.
So I will also say that we're old and we no longer can live independently, so we live at a senior residence, which got to be too expensive for us. And so we're moving to a different senior residence, which now we're in Glastonbury, but that is going to be in West Hartford, which amazes me. It's half the price. We can actually afford it. And guess what? They have Shabbat services there every Friday night. The place we're living now, there were 6 sort of Jews when we moved in, and now it's up to 9 sort of Jews, and nobody else. GLBTQ plus anything. It's us. It's been quite a journey, and when we were talking about what we do next, we couldn't afford where we are. One of the questions was, do we go back to Dallas and live with Amy? It would be for us to be out fully in Dallas.
No way.
I love Connecticut. I'm so happy to be back here and to be able to be out. And I don't care what happens. I mean, I do care a lot, but whatever happens in the future, that closet door is closed. I'm never going back there for you.
Shirley, thank you.
Okay, so now for something completely different. The B, the T, the Q, few more letters. I'm transgender, but I never, ever, ever wanted to be transgender. In fact, I was so desperate to not be transgender that when I realized at the ripe old age of 31 that I might be transgender, one of the first things I did was I Googled, how do I not be transgender? What if I think I might be transgender, but I don't want to be? How do I not be transgender? I just wanted to be a nice Jewish boy. I mean, the truth is, if I had a choice to be born as the gender I wanted, of course I would have chosen to be a girl because I just assumed that everybody would choose to be a girl because being a girl is obviously better than being a boy. Who would choose to be a boy? I've learned a lot in the last few years. But I just thought that was normal to want to be a girl. I just wanted to be the nice Jewish boy that I thought everybody expected of me. So I grew this enormous beard. And after college, I went to Jerusalem, I went to yeshiva, and I wore tzitzis, and I davened 3 times a day with talis and tefillin because I was such a nice Jewish boy. And I repressed every aspect of my personality that might have been seen as feminine, lest people think that I was trying to be like a girl. I lived my life in fear of that. But it never occurred to me that I might be transgender. In fact, though I had thought at one point that I might become a rabbi, instead I married a rabbi and became the husband of a rabbi, and I was very proud of that. I felt no connection with masculinity. I felt no connection with manhood. But this was about 10, 12 years ago, and there weren't that many men married to rabbis. But people call us. I wasn't a Rebbitzin. I was the Rebbitzer or the Rebbitznan, and I would organize support groups for other men who were married to clergy or soon to be clergy. And when my now former spouse became a rabbi at a congregation, people would say, "Oh, so what do we call you? Are you the rabbi's wife?" And they would laugh about it. Well, jokes on them, because then I did become the rabbi's wife. Maybe I was always the rabbi's wife, because nobody knew it. And in 2015, when our child was born, I became the father who was the primary caretaker who changed diapers and took our kids to the playground. And I wrote blogs about it, and I was very intentional. Fathers can change diapers too. Fathers can be primary caretakers of their children too. And so it came as a huge shock to me in 2018 at the ripe old age of 31 when I realized that maybe I am the rabbi's wife. Who knew? Maybe I am a mother raising my, raising my child, and I did not want it. I was scared, I was confused, and everything that I thought I knew about being transgender turned out to be wrong. All I knew were the stereotypes that I had grown up with. And I was a good ally. I had a couple of classmates who transitioned, and I supported them. There were a few people in my congregation who were non-binary, and I was a good ally and I supported them, but I thought that being transgender was a choice. I thought it was a lifestyle. I thought that it was a delusion. I thought that it was a fetish. I thought it was all of these things. And I didn't see myself as a fetishist. I didn't see myself as delusional. I didn't see myself as somebody choosing this. And so how could I be transgender? And aside from that, I was in my 30s. I thought that trans people always knew since they were children that they were transgender. How could I be transgender if I didn't grow up cross-dressing, if I didn't grow up, secretly putting on makeup and putting on my mother's dresses? So it was very, very confusing for me. The hardest thing in my life that I've ever done was not coming out publicly as transgender. The hardest thing for me was coming out to myself as transgender, and maybe many of you can relate to that. I struggled with my gender for 1.5 years, very, very, very secretly. I told my then wife, who was very supportive. I told my therapist, who was supportive. I had a friend who I told who was supportive, but I was very much in the closet. And the reason why I'm mentioning all of this is because we're speaking about community tonight, and over the past several years, as I've been out and part of communities, part of that is being able to exist as myself, but part of it is also that being in communities where I could explore my own identity was so important to accepting myself, and being part of communities where other people accepted me really validated my identity and really validated my journey, and that was so important to me, particularly as a religious Jew and particularly as an Orthodox Jew. Over the last few years, I've grown to love being trans, and I'm kind of a transformer. I'm a superhero, and the perspective that I've gained, I know what it's like on both sides of the mechitza, both literally and figuratively. Being the decision to transition was the greatest decision of my life, for myself, for my health, for everybody who knows me, for my career, for everything. But it was a really, really difficult journey. So the first steps that I took were in 2019. I'm a youngin', I know, I was in my early 30s. And at my therapist's suggestion, I created a Twitter account under the name Shuli Elisheva. And that was the first time I took my steps in the world as openly as a woman, but very, very, very much in the closet. Nobody could know that I was Shuli Elisheva. Nobody could know it was me. I did tell a few people, but it was a way for me to explore just being myself, see what it's like. I remember creating my Twitter account and seeing the blank feed and thinking to myself, I could write anything. I could be anybody, but who am I going to be? What am I going to write? I had no idea what my personality would be. I had no idea who friends would be. I had no idea what I would write, how I would write. But what I ended up doing was I ended up writing poetry in Yiddish about my gender dysphoria. I'm a fluent Yiddish speaker. I speak Yiddish at home with my child who's bilingual. That surprises a lot of people. And I started writing in Yiddish about my gender dysphoria, about my depression, about my anxiety. And I wrote it all on Twitter in this very public format, but again, nobody could know that it was my poetry. And as I was on Twitter more, that was my first chance to really get to know other trans people. I had known a few trans masculine people. I didn't know any trans women. And I had no idea there were so many of us. I mean, all of a sudden I was on Twitter and there were like hundreds of trans women all of a sudden, like thousands of trans women. Where did they all come from? And that was when the stereotypes started to chip away and I started to learn what it actually means to be transgender. That was the first time I learned what was possible. I never transitioned to look like this because I never thought it would be possible. I just assumed I would always look like a man, and I never ever thought that it would ever be possible to look and live as a woman. And that summer of 2019 on Twitter completely changed everything for me. I also started to meet a few other Jewish trans people. And I also became part of Jewish Twitter and from Twitter. And all of this, I was continuing to write my poetry, and I began to really struggle with halakha because I'm not just Jewish, I'm an Orthodox Jew. And the Torah is really important to me, and halakha and Jewish law are really important to me. And so I began to struggle with verses like a man should wear women's clothing. Well, it turns out I'm not a man wearing women's clothing. I'm a woman wearing women's clothing. And in fact, ironically, one could say that for the first 33 years of my life, I cross-dressed by wearing men's clothing. And now for the first time in my life, I was not cross-dressing. And I began to look into what does the Talmud say about this verse and what does Rashi say about this verse. And actually there's a lot to say about it. And I don't want to take the time to go into that now. But I began to learn midrashim about our biblical ancestors. And I learned about Isaac being born with a female soul and only getting a male soul after the Akedah. I learned about Dinah, the daughter of Leah, originally being male in the womb, but then being changed into female in the womb because Leah prayed for a daughter. And I learned that the author of the Shulchan Aruch wrote in his mystical diary about women with the souls of men and men with the souls of women. And well, I don't quite believe a lot of what I read. The fact that our Jewish tradition acknowledged the complexity of sex and gender was mind-blowing to me. And the fact that that our rabbis actually engaged with this subject and actually wrote about it was so validating for me. A lot of what I've been talking about hasn't really been about community. I want to talk about community. One of the resentments I have, and maybe a lot of you will roll your eyes at this, I kind of roll my eyes at it too, but I was always so resentful that there were these women-only events that I could never go to, and women-only groups that I could never go to. And when I was in the closet, of course, there were many, many, many more men-only things that women couldn't go to. But when I was in the closet, I came out to one of my friends, and she said, "Oh, Mazel Tov, congratulations. And by the way, I think that Shuli would love Olaf." And I said, "What's Olaf?" And she said, "Olaf is Orthodox Ladies United in Fandom." And I said, "Oh my gosh, what's Orthodox Ladies United in Fandom?" It is a Facebook group for Orthodox ladies united in fandom, Orthodox fangirls. And my friend suggested that I join this group. And I was like, whoa, I can actually join a group for Orthodox women. And so I clicked the join request. And of course, one of the questions was, "Are you Jewish?" And I said, "Yes." And one of the questions was, "Are you Orthodox?" And I said, "Yes." And then one of the questions was, "Are you female?" And then it had in parentheses, "Please be honest." And at the time, what's the difference between female and woman? I had come to believe fairly certainly that I was a woman, but was I female? And now my driver's license says female, my hospital records say female, I'm female, and I can talk a lot about the advanced science of sex and gender, but at the time, all I knew was the basic science of sex and gender. There are men, there are women. Penis is a man, vagina is a woman. I didn't know more than that. Now I understand a lot better. But at the time, it was a real struggle for me. I felt like an imposter checking the yes button, I am female. And I joined the group, and I had no idea how others would react if they knew that there was a trans woman in the group. And so I didn't out myself. But there were ways that I tested the water. I wrote fan fiction about Doctor Who and Buffy the Vampire Slayer and Fiddler on the Roof, sometimes all at the same time. And I wove in narratives of gender dysphoria just to like test the waters. And like I asked, can anybody recommend novels with, transgender characters? And just to see how people would react. And I was shocked. I would ask, are there novels with transgender characters? And like 100 comments later, I had, more books to last a lifetime. And when I ended up eventually coming out, and then I did write in the group, by the way, I'm a trans woman, the support that I got from other trans women was, from other Orthodox women, was so unbelievable. And yes, there was transphobia. Yes, there was opposition. But I never imagined that I could join a group of Orthodox women and come out, and by and large, they would support me. There's so much I can say about being an Orthodox lady united in fandom. I don't have time tonight to go into it. I do have, well, I had a contract with a publisher for my memoir, but I realized that I couldn't meet the deadline that they set for me. So I don't know when my memoir will come out, but I am working on it, and I'll write a lot more about it there. But I did eventually come out at the end of 2019, and literally within 12 hours of my coming, I had a Facebook message from a reporter. Why did I have a Facebook message from a reporter? Because I was married to a conservative rabbi, and apparently, as far as anybody could tell, I'm the first person in history to come out as a trans woman while married to a synagogue's rabbi. There was somebody, it turns out, who came out a couple months before me as transmasculine and non-binary, but that was very, very private. I came out publicly, and this was news. 6 months later, the JTA, one of the biggest Jewish news agencies in the world, published an article about me. It was translated to like 6 different languages, republished in Jewish newspapers all over the world. And there are some errors in it, and can't go back and fix those now. But it was a very, very, very public transition. And our synagogue was supportive. The conservative synagogue, we were in Rhode Island, and the JTA reporter interviewed the local Orthodox rabbi, the local modern Orthodox rabbi, and one of the things he said really stuck with me was that for many people in his congregation, transgender was a political issue. They never met a trans person before, but now it's a personal thing. They actually knew somebody who was trans. And over the last few years, I've become an activist. I'm very, very visible. I've written so much about being trans. And part of why I do that is because so many people have never met a trans person before. It's just a political issue. It's something abstract. And well, I'm a human being, and here I am. I also got so much harassment for that. I grew up with anti-Semitism. I got death threats when I was a kid for being Jewish. I've never been harassed the way that I've been harassed for being openly trans. And the intersections of transphobia and misogyny and anti-Semitism all blended together just blew my mind. But this is who I am, and the support that I got was so unbelievable. I don't think any of this would have been possible 20 years ago, 30 years ago, but times have really changed. And even in the Orthodox world, the more that I transitioned, the more I realized I need to really be open about this. And so about 1.5 years ago, I created a Facebook group called Shuli Elisheva's Diary of a Religious Trans Woman. And many of the women who are in this OLIF group, Orthodox Ladies United in Fandom, joined my group. And for many of them, it was the first time they met a trans person. And I very intentionally made my group a safe space for anybody to ask questions without fear of being labeled transphobic. And it's just blown my mind. All these Orthodox women and some Orthodox men, but mostly Orthodox women in my group, who have become so supportive of me. I wouldn't be where I am now without the support of all these Orthodox women. A year and a half ago, I moved to West Hartford. My stint as the rabbi's wife was very short-lived. She's very, very supportive of me, and I'm so grateful. But as some marriages come to an end, our marriage came to an end. She got a job in Hartford, and so I moved as well because we have a child. And for the first time since 2009, I got to actually pick my own synagogue community, but I was terrified. I wanted to join an Orthodox shul, but I was so scared. Would they let me sit on the women's side? Would they let me use the women's bathroom? Would they insist on counting me in the minyan? Would they even let me in the building? And so I called Rabbi Adler at David, thank you. And he was so supportive. I couldn't believe how supportive he was and has been. In the summer of 2021, I joined Beth David, and for the first time, I sat on the women's side of the pizza. And I didn't know, will I feel this jolt of excitement? Will I feel this jolt of terror? And the truth is, I didn't really feel anything except, oh, of course I'm on the women's side, right? Like I felt like I was where I belonged. You know, so many people believe in these stereotypes of trans women transitioning because we get some sort of sexual kick from it, you know, or because we just love people to see us as women, or, you know, we transition to be happy, or any of these things. No, I transition to be myself, and the women's side is where I belong. And on Simchas Torah, I danced with the women, not with the men, and I carried the Torah on the women's side, not on the men's side. I was asked to read the prayer for our country, which is something at Beth David that only the women do. But of course, it wasn't all just, you know, gumdrops and rainbows. It was hard for me because life as an Orthodox Jewish woman is very different than life as an Orthodox Jewish man. Before my transition, not only was I living under the assumption that I was a man, I was living under the assumption that I was a Kohen. And I would recite the priestly blessing. I would do them on college campuses, at the Kotel. I got aliyot, I got the Kohen aliyot. I would read Torah and Haftorah and all of the Megillot. And now I'm in a community where I can't do any of that. And it really came crashing down on me on Rosh Hashanah when we were in the middle of the Musaf Amidah, and the rabbi made an announcement for the Kohanim to go to the back to wash their hands and get ready to give the priestly blessing. And I lost it. I felt such a sense of loss. I don't think it's accurate to say I ran out of the sanctuary, but I was definitely walking at a cliff. And I went to the women's bathroom and I laid down on the breastfeeding bench and I closed my eyes and I cried for about 10 minutes. And then I stood up and I looked in the mirror at my face covered with makeup. And I thought to myself, so this is it. You know, this is my life now. And of course, I had no regrets. How could I? This is who I am. I have no choice in the matter. But this is my life, and it's so different. And yeah, I could go to other synagogues where I could have aliyot, where I could read Torah and Haftorah and all of that. But in Orthodox spaces, not anymore. So it was very difficult for me, but it was also very fulfilling. When I moved to West Hartford and I joined Beth David, I wasn't just worried about the rabbi, I was worried about the congregation. And just as Rabbi Adler was supportive, so too was the congregation. When I moved here, I was a year and a half on hormone replacement therapy, a year and a half into my transition. And as it seems, many people could not tell that I was transgender. And because of the heteronormativity of the space, you know, in Kiddush, people would ask me, why did you move here? I would say, well, my ex got a job here and I moved to be with our child. And they would ask me about my ex-husband. Everybody assumed that my ex was a man because everybody saw me as a woman. It was amazing. And even after I told some people And I'm sure rumors spread, and I'm sure people talked about me. I was just one of the ladies, and people have been so nice to me and so supportive of me again. Who would have ever thought that I, a trans woman, could join an Orthodox congregation, and the rabbi is supportive, and the congregation is supportive, and I'm just one of the ladies.
Shirley, can I ask you to wrap up?
Yes.
Pass it to Eileen.
Absolutely.
Thank you
the
so much.
last thing that I'll say is that about a year ago, I began writing for an Orthodox women's magazine called Unorthodoxed, because not all Jewish women fit in the box, and not all Orthodox women fit in the box. And I wrote 6 articles for them about being an Orthodox trans woman. And again, the support that I got from the editor-in-chief who insisted that I write for them, from the other Orthodox women on staff, was overwhelming. And of course, the magazine got banned in many communities as well, and I got flooded with harassment. And that'll be a story for another time. Those of you who've been following the news with Kiwi Farms, this hate forum being taken down, they came after me too, and they doxed me, and all sorts of terrible things happened because I was out and proud as an Orthodox Jewish trans woman. But now my life is better than it's ever been. I've gone off almost all of my mental health medications. I stopped taking my Crohn's medication, if you can believe it, on my doctor's recommendation, because it has just been so healing. And obviously there's a lot more to say, but I've been requested to stop.
Thank you so
talking, I'm
much.
stop talking. I'm happy to answer questions later. And I'm really, really grateful to be here. I'll pass it.
I'm so grateful to sit next to you. Can I be your Twitter friend?
Please be my Twitter friends.
Thank you so much. It's amazing. So our last panelist is Eileen Frank. And I'm sorry to make you follow that, but
That's okay.
yeah.
Good evening, everyone. So I was asked to speak both about my wedding, my wife Caroline is in the back, and then also how Congregation of Israel had its first Pride Shabbat back in 2019, and the two are actually bizarrely connected. So I moved to Connecticut in 2015, and I was raised conservative, and I had been in upstate New York for a number of years, and was very active in the Reform Synagogue at that point, where we had a lesbian rabbi, and I was out in the congregation. That was not somehow my ability to align my being Jewish with my being out lesbian. That all happened in New York, so I want to focus on what happened here. So I moved to Connecticut in 2015, did a little bit of shul shopping, and eventually landed at Congregation of Israel. And Darlene and I were slowly getting active in the congregation. Darlene is Jew adjacent, the most Jew adjacent person I know. I can just like needle her a little bit. She recently just came up with a 3-year calendar of all the Jewish holidays for us to plan Pride events. So that's how Jew adjacent. Okay, so we landed at CBI, and New Year's of 2018, my now wife and I were sitting on a couch with a friend, and we looked at each other, and I was like, 18 is a good month number in Judaism. She was like, I know. And I was like, maybe this is the year we get married. And she was like, I think it is. And we were like, okay, we're getting married in 2018. This is it. We're going to do it. And we came back, and there were 2 other proposals. That's a whole other story I'll tell you about, but there were. And we decided that we wanted to see if Rabbi Andy would marry us from CBI. Now, my experience at my synagogue that I had gone to in Fort New York was that I had a rabbi who, as a married lesbian, was totally fine with the gay thing, but not totally fine with interfaith marriages. And so I actually wrote Rabbi Andy with more trepidation about asking her to perform an interfaith marriage than a gay marriage. And I think we wrote some very nervously worded email. Andy, would you ever consider marrying us? And she was like, yes, of course, come talk to me. And so we were like, oh, this is so exciting. And we went, we had a meeting, and I remember Rabbi Andy said, there are two things I insist on, a ketubah and a chuppah. And I knew that, like, of course, I was going to say wear a chuppah. That was like, completely like no smarter. But I never thought in a million years I would have ketubah. What an ancient document full of incredibly patriarchal language that has nothing to do with how many shekels or, you have to rescue me from being captive. And I was like, I'm like, never am I going to find a ketubah. And Rabbi Andy was like, I still like ketubah, find my link. So it might have been nice for Rabbi Andy. It's late in the evening. And so Darlene and I spent some time on several websites, and we have a beautiful ketubah that is framed in our home. It's incredibly lovely. And as we met with Rabbi and planned our wedding, which was not in the sanctuary because we got married outside, which was meaningful to us, but our wedding was the most Jewish wedding I ever thought I would ever have. There was the stomping on the glass. We had a version of the 7 blessings. We had, the chuppah. In the planning of it all, I had this moment where every single female ancestor yelled at me and told me I was not allowed to get married until sunset on Saturday. That changed our entire evening order, but it was just amazing, and you all should have been there because it was an incredible day. I'm sorry, Mark. I'm sorry to hear. So I will say that leading up to the wedding, which was a very private, we had 42 guests. It was a very small, intimate wedding. We were also really embraced by the synagogue. Rabbi Michael Pincus invited us the Shabbat before our wedding to come and have an uproof and be, to stand in front of the congregation. And I never thought that was ever going to happen. We did that. And I said to Darlene, I hope I don't cry. That breathe. So I really wanted the congregation to sing Simon and Mazel Tov. Like that was super important. And I didn't think that was going to happen at our wedding because the guests were 40% Jewish and 60% Pentecostal. So I didn't really think, except for Darlene. So I didn't think Simon Mazel Tov was going to be spontaneously sung at our wedding, but it was beautifully sung at the altar, and it just made me feel so fabulous. So because of this wedding, and because the congregation and the rabbis were so accepting of us, when 2019 rolled around and we were all preparing to celebrate the 50th anniversary of Stonewall and mark that momentous moment in LGBTQ history, I had the chutzpah to just email Rabbi Andy and say, we should do a Pride Shabbat this year. It was the most natural thing in the world. This was just going to be, of course we should do Pride Shabbat. And Rabbi Andy, being Rabbi Andy, was like, yeah, let's do it. She's like, what do you want to do? And we formed this committee, and that these wonderful people, and I would, dear friends now, and we organized a Pride Shabbat, and we picked music, and we picked prayers, and we included things that we wanted to say. And I don't think I ever for a moment thought that it was going to be the radical event that it was. I just thought it made sense. CBI welcomed Darlene and me. We had gotten married. We should do Pride Shabbat. And it was at that service which blew us away. It was, the sanctuary was so full. There was so much love. There was so much joy. And Karen, you had pointed out that there were people who hadn't been in CBI in decades. There were people who had, and we heard some of this tonight, had real pains and hurts within the Jewish community. And on that night, it was a moment towards healing and acceptance and celebration and inclusion. And then we were still looking forward to Pride Shabbat 2020. And we pulled it off even in the pandemic. And we pulled off 21 in a pandemic. And we pulled off 22 in a post-pandemic. And we will pull off 23. And we're just really proud that we have this event and that it's brought together members from our congregation, but more importantly, members from the wider community, as a symbol of how important it is to celebrate all aspects of a community. We use the word community as if it is monolithic, and so often community is actually formed by really much smaller communities that come together with one shared or some couple of shared experiences. And by lifting up that that moment of a community, we can be a better community altogether. So on that happy note, I wish you all a prideful life, a joyful life, l'chaim, and I'm going to turn this over before I start singing, but no one wants that.
That's wonderful. You can see that we've kind of crammed together a lot of people who, each of whom could have taken up all the time we had tonight. So I appreciate your patience. Thank you. And I appreciate all the panelists being willing to sort of be crammed in that way. So we could take a few questions now, but if you all are super tired and need to go home, we can also do it informally over snacks in the back of the room. So does anyone have a question that they really want the whole panel to hear, or?
I'm really very moved by what happened.
Thank you, I am too. Yeah.
And it took so many people up here. Usually you don't have to have 18 people. You know, you can usually get by maybe having 20. And I really am very proud of all the people who spoke up and all the things that came out of it.
Thank you. I'd like to ask just one question. We have Julie's Twitter address, and we have Karen's, almost all of Karen's email. Could we get through an email a way to contact everybody, especially how CBI would like to welcome folks for our Pride 23 Pride Shabbat?
Sure, I'd be happy to do that, assuming it's all right with the panelists to share your emails.
Yes, I totally forgot. So-
Yeah, yeah, thank you. I'd be happy to do that.
Thank
Yeah,
you, everyone.
yeah.
I would not be Emma's mother if I didn't tell you about Emma's book. Embarrassing Margie terribly.
That's another reason to do it. That's right.
Right, it's like, so she has a thing on Substack, and in this, that's like a new way to support writers. And once a month, she has like a little salon, and different people bring their writing. I'm gonna tell her that I'm gonna give it that. So I have these cards here because I promised her, and I promised Marge I would not sell books. But well, you know, she's an ambassador. She's a good kid. It's okay. It's okay. You know?
Buy the book. Here's Emma. Beautiful level. She's very smart. I can just see what she's doing.
He's an ambassador by the book.
Thank you so much. And I can't leave without commenting that hearing the testimony from different generations, hear about what different people have experienced, was very striking to me, from all the stories that were shared, and even Julie's description of how Twitter became, such an important place for you was obviously, that's obviously something of our era, that reflects that. Whereas what was the newspaper called, Karen? Metro Line, right? That was the way to find community, a few decades ago. So even at that level, it's fascinating and wonderful to hear both the some common experiences and some differences across time.
Okay.
So,
And a quick comment.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you all for sharing your stories were incredibly moving. I wanted to just make a comment on the post 2020, I guess, West Hartford. My wife and I moved to West Hartford 2 years ago, and I got married last year. Within about 5 days of moving into our house, which is right near Norfolk School, we learned of about 8 other lesbian couples that lived within walking distance. One of whom was immediately next door, and several of whom are Jewish. I very much related to the Jewish adjacent description that you used. I may not do. We had to navigate the interfaith wedding that's skewed way Jewish and my Protestant relatives kind of come on. Anyway, I wanted to just share that and really appreciated just hearing again the intergenerational span of your stories and the evolution of Jewish and gay life in West Hartford.
thank you so much.
Thank you for listening.
I
Yes.
love reading your post because I met you both at a very beginning of your relationship. And I love
We had a
following.
Seder,
What?
to become your house for Seder.
No, you came to Julia's house and we were there.
Oh, that's right.
And we were supporting you in terms of that lady in Brooklyn. We
Right.
said, forget Brooklyn. Stay in that
Forget her.
country. And next thing I know, she introduces this whole, like, beautiful woman at a concert. And I said, "You, Lauren?" And I follow them and they make such good food. You know, it's another place I want to be invited to. They really make me effort to make certain kinds of brisket and things like that.
I like that.
I think it's amazing that there's so many lesbian couples in the neighborhood. I grew up in West Hartford in the 1950s, 1960s, was very, Osmond area, really between North here. It was, it's amazing to me that, yeah, it's amazing to me that you get involved, because I think we are interwoven in communities, that never, when I was growing up, when I was in high school in the 1970s, going to Hall High, it never, and I was, I knew I was gay, but I wasn't really out at that point. It wasn't really being honest with myself. It never would have dawned on me that it never would have dawned on me in 1972 or 1973 that at some point in my life I could come home to West Hartford and lived and ended married to somebody. I'm not married, probably never been married, but that I could have been married to a man who lived in West Hartford. So the fact that you have so many lesbian couples next to you nearby, it's just it's stunning.
My mom's comment, she was with me checking out the house and then we met the neighbors and they were like, oh, hi, and this is my wife. And my mom, we're walking away. My mom goes, so were you looking for this? I was like, Mom, no, we didn't tell a realtor we're looking for an underground lesbian neighborhood.
Wonderful. And
We had to be so out, for them, because Emma was still out. Well, on our block, we discovered there were a couple of other lesbians on our block who were very friendly. But two of the girls of the family that became closest with gay, they married, and they each had a child. And one became a cantor, who's pretty well known. And it feels like, even though there were those years when we were alone in our kitchen, no, we were never alone. This family connected with us and really. And we turned their kids gay. But they became such an umbrella for us. And Julia too. And when Paula moved here, we finally got back our New York. Then we got Karen, and now Karen comes over to our house like we're in New York. She comes over and says, I'll have a cup of coffee. And that's what life is like, So you're all invited to come. We have a very nice espresso. And, stop by. Marge has a great garden. We're at 70 Auburn Road.
That's the after part.
Thank you so much. I think let's wrap it up, but thank you so much to the panelists. And please stay in chat. We do have some rugelach and some little cookies over.
I'm so. I didn't know it was part, now I do. You only know part of it. I only know a little bit of the stories. Now I feel like a little more. Right. Yeah.